Welcome back to the Mina Kimes Show featuring Lenny, the only NFL podcast where one of the host's favorite coach is Brian Daboll. That's also where he gets his breakfast. The Daboll. That's Lenny. Mina Kimes. Yeah, you know. It's preseason for all of us. That voice you just heard is a frequent collaborator on the show. Hasn't been on in a while, though. Excited to have him on for what might be one of the nerdier premises I've come up with. Maybe it's a little bit, it's pretty nerdy for the week before the season starts, and I don't care. Right. You guys don't care. He's Ben Solak. Ben from The Ringer, welcome back to the show.
Thanks. Yeah, no, I filled out my Mina Kimes listener survey recently, and I thought about putting in there guests. I was like, haven't had that Solak kid on in a bit, but get Ben back. But then I was like, nah. I put more.
You got a lot of votes.
Did I?
You got a lot of votes,
huge.
Ben.
I didn't think I would.
A lot of votes. Yeah. So this is a 2-part podcast. The second part, I'm having my, if it couldn't get any nerdier, well, my second part is my good friend Seth Walder. Not to say that he's nerdy, but what we are doing is nerdy. I asked him for some of his statistical takeaways from last season that might inform what happens this season. He's a guy who I talk to constantly. Yeah, he does so much great stuff. He's our analytics writer at ESPN, looking at trends, developing new stats, some of which we'll talk about in the second half. And he gave me some pretty good takeaways. I'm excited for that conversation. I'm also excited for this conversation. It's one that's been brewing for a little bit. I had to rebrand the premise of it to make it seem less obnoxious because, okay, so here's the backstory. Basically, Ben and I were going back and forth about, it really was David Long Jr., the linebacker on the Dolphins, formerly of the Titans. And I think the reason we were talking about him, or kind of joking about him, is that he is a guy who it seems like every NFL podcaster and analyst is obsessed with. And then some other names came up. Frankie Louvu is another guy who is constantly in the mix. Nico Autry. So we were like, who's the all hipster team? And just names were flying. And then I thought about it and I was like, you know what? This is actually really useful to dwell on because, one, I think it's kind of a cheat code if you want to sound like an NFL hipster talking about your teams or the NFL in general. The names we're about to go over are like the guys who win games who maybe don't get talked about as much. So spoiler alert, we're not going to be spending this entire podcast talking about Aaron Rodgers and Tyreek Hill, but I actually think that it's really useful information you going into the season because these are names that you're going to hear. They're names that could swing games. They're names. I actually covered a lot of the league, and I which is kind of cool too. So if you're a fan of a team and you haven't heard the name of your favorite player on the team that it feels like the national media doesn't give credit to, well, you might hear it on this podcast. So I've rebranded it the all underrated team.
It works for me. I will say, you said like, if you feel like your team, this particular player doesn't get covered by national people the way he should. I agree with you. When you put out the tweet, there were a lot of people like, Aaron Jones. No, Aaron Jones does not qualify. There was something like Christian Darrisaw. Absolutely not. That's a classic fan brain of like, my guy is the 7th best running back, and I think he should be the 3rd best running back. Those people to me didn't qualify. I tried to go for people who either had like never made a Pro Bowl, never made the NFL top 100 list, or like both kind of recently, maybe they were young, like fudged around the corners a little bit. But that was the Feds post I was trying to go off of.
We're gonna fill out an entire roster, except for I actually didn't do a kicker, punter, or placeholder.
No chance.
Or no specialties. I also would say I think quarterback is kind of impossible when it comes to this exercise because quarterback you could do underrated but not hipster, if that makes sense. Like when I was thinking about it, Ben, the name that I actually thought of as being underrated, but I don't think quite falls into the rubric of how we're going to do this, was Kirk Cousins, who I actually think has become underrated. This has been a weird journey that I've been on with Kirk Cousins, where I'm confidently ready to say that I think he is the best quarterback in the Kirk Cousins tier of quarterbacks, which feels appropriate. But yeah, I think it was on the show Quarterback where they asked Mahomes and Mariota who was the most underrated quarterback. I think they both said Cousins, and I was watching that and I was like, damn, I kind of agree. When did this happen? How did I become Kirk Cousins build?
Here's the thing about Kirk, and like it doesn't surprise me that Mahomes and Mariota would say that, is it's Kirk's issue isn't his talent. Kirk's issue is his choices. It's the Derek Carr thing, right? Where it's like,
yeah,
throw the ball past the line to gain, and I will respect you more, even if your completion percentage goes down, your yards per attempt goes down, you take more sacks. Like, you have to play to win the game a little bit, right? Whereas Kirk, I think, and can at times play so painstakingly within the structure of the offense that he makes decisions that blow your mind at times.
Well, I think that's why I got Kirk pilled, because in the second half of the season, like that switch flipped last year. Like if you look at his stats from last year and you break them out first and second, in the second half, like they're really, I mean, there was ups and downs. There's turnover worthy plays, but also he was 8th in the air yards per attempt, 6th in CPOE, 5th in QBR when pressure. I mean, he was just letting that thing fly. And it's interesting because I don't know, whatever. I feel like it's going to continue this season with the addition of Jordan Addison.
So you said Kirk is the best Kirk of all the Kirks, right? My question, because one of my candidates for hipster quarterback is Ryan Tannehill in the Kirk family, or is he in a separate family?
No, I love that answer too. I think it's a great one. He is in the Kirk family. So, and I think he's right below Kirk. I think that's where he came in my QB draft.
Here's my thing. My thing with Tannehill is, unlike many of the Kirk iterations, Tannehill's got some gumption to him, right? He's got some mustard to him. He has that thing I'm talking about where like he's gonna sit in there and fire. Sometimes debilitatingly so, right? Sometimes you're like, Ryan, save yourself. Check it down. Just take the sack. Like, you don't need to take this hit over your ribs. But Tannehill has like the downfield mindset and the aggressive mindset that, like, when all of these offenses were in their heyday, you know, all the under center, all the wide zone, the one that like actually would scare you the most on a 3rd and long. This was like probably still a couple years ago now. Like Goff has evolved, Kirk has evolved, even Jimmy. Like Jimmy's gotten better, Jimmy's gotten quicker and smarter. The one that scared you the most was Tannehill, because he actually had like the arm and the size to really punish you like outside of structure. So Tannehill was the one for me. The other one was Dak, which like it's not even real, man. Like it's just me feeling like Dak's underrated. And Dak is always beat up, and all everybody talks about is his interceptions and his postseason, and he's just really good, and I feel bad for him, but he actually doesn't super qualify for this because he's definitely too good to be on this list. He still is, though, underrated.
Yeah, it's like when we say all underrated, are we talking about underrated relative to first take?
Yeah.
Underrated relative to
Dak is first team all beleaguered quarterback. First team all beat up and scrutinized quarterback. Underrated.
First
not so
team
much.
Underrated by national television. We can give that to Dak. Okay, so that's quarterbacks out of the way. I don't feel like it really works for this. The other positions, now we can get really nerdy. Let's start with wide receiver. I'll let you go first. I wrote down a few names. I don't know how many you did for each position. We didn't really talk about it, but let me hear who you've got.
Yeah, no, I pretty much listed names until I stopped being able to think of good guys, which is why I have 7 names for defensive tackle when we get there.
I have so many defensive tackles.
It's just the spot where there's so many different ways to be good. Now. It's so good.
Yeah.
Now, with that said, at wide receiver, like I think you have to start with the perennially underrated family of good, big blocking slot receivers who are reliable over the middle of the field, right? This is like the Robert Woods Alumnus Award. The guys that like Chris Godwin's been a dude for ages who was like, oh, he's the most underrated, right? And he's kind of, I think, elevated now at this point. So the guy that I circled for that is 2 different names, Kendrick Bourne and Jacoby Myers. Both of these players are just so useful. They're so handy to have around, right? A little bit of different roles, obviously some overlap in terms of the offense that they played in. Jacoby now with the Raiders, but the ability to block, right? Bill Belichick had the Kendrick Bourne blocking line last week. The ability to block to be added into the running game. to give you that additional seventh guy to block you when you're in 11 personnel, and then just make tough catches on third down, right? Like whenever our good friend Nate Tice talks about Kendrick Bourne, the first thing he brings up is the third and fourth down conversion rate. This guy gets you another series. He gets you the sticks. He gets you a conversion. And so when we talk about wide receiver talent, like the ceiling of wide receiver talent is enormous, right? Like everybody knows who the top like 15, 20 guys are. But you want a Jacoby Myers on your team the same way you've always wanted a Robert Woods and a Chris Godwin and even now a Kendrick Bourne, where these guys fill a variety of roles for you. They wear a bunch of different hats and they get you that next series, that next conversion, and then your star can go and dominate.
Kendrick Bourne's catching ability it's one of those things I like because you just see it. Mm-hmm. I posted a clip from the preseason of him like climbing the ladder, making this like insane catch, and then it shows up in both the smart stats and the dumb stats. So over the last 3 years, on 10+ yard passes, so getting rid of the easy stuff, he's caught nearly 70% of them. That's the second most in the NFL behind Randall Cobb. Yeah. So that's your basic stat. And then Seth's actually going to talk about wide receiver score, which does a really, really nice job with catch stuff. You guys should really check it out because they're really, they zero in on the quality of the throw, which is something that's very hard to capture statistically. And Kendrick Bourne in 2021, before he was excommunicated by Matt Patricia, was second in the NFL then. So it's one of those things where you watch him, you're like, that guy makes tough catches. The numbers show he makes tough catches. I really hope he gets reintegrated into this Patriots offense because I do think he's a good player. Both, he's very useful in the red zone, and they were a horrible red zone team last year. But I just think he's so useful for the reasons you mentioned as well, the blocking. So he was on my list too. Okay, I'll throw out a couple of names that I included on my list. I was tempted to include Brandon Ayuk, but I was like, that's too. Brandon Ayuk, I feel like, is entering the Tyler Lockett tier of underrated, but still everyone thinks he's good. So
the first name I wrote down was Lockett, and then I was like, all right, it's not 2018. Like we can't keep doing this.
He was the chronically, yeah, right. Okay, a guy that I've talked about a lot, Rashid Shaheed. Another one where like he's the ultimate small sample size. The stats are freaking insane. Every pass he caught last year was like 45 yards, so it kind of skews things. But when you go back and watch the catches, Ben, which I did it was part of the NFC South pod, right? Because it wasn't that many of them, but they're not easy.
No,
like he is not just a speed guy. He is really good at tracking. He caught some really off-target balls. He has the physicality, I think, to also win at the catch point. So I like him a lot.
Yeah, no, Shaheed is, and they also couldn't get him like free and easy release stuff, right? It wasn't like schemed up, like get this guy on the run and hide him behind a stack and then let him outrun guys because they didn't have the talent to do that. So they just had to line him up in there and ask him to beat corners, and he's able to do it. And it feels like they've been looking for that guy for a bit, right? They had like the Deontay Hardy years, and they were trying to find some guy who gave them like a real speed dimension. And then since the preseason last year, he was a rookie coming into last year's camp, if memory serves. He's just been like winning that job.
The Saints, by the way. Yeah. I don't think I ever mentioned he's on the Saints. Sorry.
Oh, I know. It's on the all underrated team. We don't even say the team.
No, we got to mention.
You got to go find them, right? It's the hipster thing. Like, oh, you don't know where they're playing. All right, don't worry about it. No, so he is a good one. I tried to get players who had a couple of years under their belt. Like I thought about Shaheed. The other guy that I thought about for wide receiver was Jahan Dotson. Dotson's such a funny player to me. Dotson just is like a tough as nails top 20 pick with above average athleticism and like speeds and quickness and acceleration, and nobody talks about him because the rest of that wide receiver class is just nuts, right? So like Garrett Wilson, Chris Olave, Drake London, they're all insane. Traylon Burks obviously has like, the AJ Brown, whatever, he's going to step into that role thing. And Jahan Dotson's just there behind Terry McLaurin and not behind Curtis Samuel. I think people think he is. He definitely isn't. Who just had a lights out season with terrible quarterbacking last year. So Dotson's a guy for me who I think like, right, Shaheed and Dotson, if they do again in year 2 what they did in year 1, they're going to be like, all right, these guys are legit and we need to start talking about them.
I think there's certainly a theme of guys who can make really difficult catches that's coming into play here. Guys who can get open, guys who can make difficult catches. Scrolling down, I thought about Boyd. I decided to put in the Lockett tier of like everybody knows he's good. Okay, so I have 2 players together, and we can transition to tight end here a little bit because it's a wide receiver and a tight end. This I think might surprise you. So this is a personal thing.
Okay.
I think both Isaiah Hodgins and Daniel Bellinger are good on the Giants.
Okay.
I'm going real hipster here.
Isaiah Hodgins, you're talking to a 2018 Pac-12 draft analyst for the Draft Network. Loved me some Isaiah Hodgins film at Oregon State, all right? That was my boy. Very happy to see him succeed. I agree with you. Hodgins is a legit player. Bellinger, I'm not going to sit here and pretend I've watched enough Bellinger to have a strong opinion on him. He had utility. I know he did, but I didn't watch him too much.
Before he got horribly, he had like this really gruesome injury last year to his eye. It was like, it sounded awful. It's one of those injuries where like I can actually imagine it happening to me. So I'm like, and he did struggle coming back. Before he got injured, the Giants 12 personnel, they ran a lot, was extremely, I mean, it felt like every time Daniel Jones booted, it was an automatic first down to Daniel Bellinger. I think he, like, I had no opinion of him before last season. I think he is a totally capable blocker, but he just has like good, you know, he's a pretty good all around tight end. And he just has like really good feel for getting open versus zone. He's big enough and quick enough to get open versus man. And perhaps most importantly, predictively, and he also caught everything, by the way. Really good hands. Again, that theme continues. Same with Hodgins. Both had really, really, really good hands. They had to make a lot of contested catches because of the low depth of target of that offense.
Yep.
Here's the thing about Bellinger, and this is the Giants only had one drive, right, with their starters this year.
Okay.
And it looked super easy. It was super schemed up. It was awesome. The touchdown, Darren Waller, you see the attention, unsurprisingly, paid to him. Daniel Bellinger, wide open. I think he is going to produce so much because of the presence of Darren Waller in this offense, and I expect this team to play, and because he can block and stay on the field. So I feel good. This, to me, feels like a little bit predictive. Like, I'm like, okay, Daniel Bellinger this year, I think, is going to be one of the beneficiaries of the continued evolution of the Giants offense.
Yeah, no, I definitely thought about it that way too, where I was like, who do I kind of want to plant my flag on for the 2023 season and be like, I told you they were underrated. No, Bellinger getting the second best guy on the opposing defense to cover tight ends is a good, right? Like, it's a good draw. That makes a lot of sense to me. When you said like wide receiver tight end transition, I 100% thought you were going to do Juwan Johnson from the Saints, who's a guy that I have down.
He's on my list.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah. He's just fun. I mean, he's just like how many wide receiver to tight end convert transition, whatever guys have we gone through? And then Juwan Johnson just figured it out for the Saints, and he's stinking good. Tight end is a weird one because there's 3 to 4 really good guys, and then there's a bunch of just extremely solid players who will just like Hayden Hurst and CJ Uzoma bounce themselves around the league for like however many years, and you don't really like know which one's going to elevate. So you have Bellinger, like Juwan Johnson was the guy for me, and then David Njoku was the other guy for me at tight end, who Njoku's had such a weird career arc, right? Like the super early draft capital. Oh, he's going to be such a great receiving threat. All of a sudden, tight end blocking becomes really important for the Cleveland offense. He kind of doesn't fit. Trade conversations, and then Baker drama, and like all this Browns attention and like craziness, and just very quietly in the late 2010s, David Njoku got good at blocking, and we all missed it. Just know, like, all of a sudden he just came out one week. It was like, wait a minute. I was a Chiefs game, I remember, early in the season. I want to say it was 2020, might have been 21, where I was just like, what the heck got into 85? Like, when did this happen? And now he's on the field consistently. He's got the same receiving chops he's always had, and he's a really impactful blocker. Like, David Njoku's a 3-down run pass threat tight end guy on what projects to the Browns expect to be kind of a better, more successful passing offense. Njoku is one of the guys for me where I was like, all right, sneak a little Njoku mention in there, and then if he has a really good season,
I like it.
Call it. Yeah,
that's a good one. I feel like is kind of slept on. Like, you're right. I think it's because of the nature of the draft position and how he came in, and
right.
And a reminder, by the way, that tight ends get better. Like, maybe more than any other position. You know, it takes a second to put for them. Yeah, and I think, like, you're right to also note kind of there's the all around guys. I would put Bellinger in that group, and then there's just like the ultimate high upside athleticism. Juwan Johnson for me fits into that group. I would say Chiga Kwanko, who's a definite all hipster favorite on the Titans. I would put in that second category where it's just an absolute demon with the ball in his hands.
He's such a good one for an all hipster team. because you pronounce his name correctly, and if that's how you let people know, like, hey, I know who Chico Okonkwo is. Like, I can just rip it off the dome. Like, it's all right, we're chilling. Maryland, whatever. I got the info. Yeah, he's
The
one where
Titans
like,
have so many.
yeah.
By the way,
Oh,
we'll get to the defense.
the Titans is just every like you ask yourself, how does this Vrabel team keep winning these games I don't expect them to, and then you actually go through your roster and you're like, oh, I like this player. Oh, this guy's got, oh, like whatever, yeah. And so no, they're a great spot for it. Chico Okonkwo is the classic one. That's a like card carrying member of Football Hipster Society. Is you got to have a Chico Okonkwo tweet or two.
Third in yards after the catch over expected. Second in yards per target. Second in yards after the catch per reception amongst tight ends. Small sample size, but they appear to have found a real. He's, by the way, Kelsey is like first in every single one. They appear to have found a real gem in him. Are there any? Okay, before we move on, are there any other wide receivers or tight ends that you would just like to give a quick shout to?
I did have Pat Freiermuth down for tight end, which he's like I think everybody knows he's good. I don't think folks realize that like he was the second target getter for Pickett down the stretch last year. He was getting more consistent targets per game, more consistent production per game than George Pickens was. Talk about a guy who catches everything, right? Ludicrously tough over the middle of the field, and then a legitimate plus as a blocker. I don't think he's perfect. Like, he has some bad reps for sure. Young tight ends typically tend to, but he is a guy who legitimately is impactful in terms of when he gets his hands on a linebacker, and then he can hang against defensive linemen. Watching him, so I watched a lot of Steelers offense recently, which is, I'm not into that reality of my life, but I have. Watching him reminds me of watching young Goddard, like when Goddard was first emerging for the Eagles behind Zach Ertz. I don't think he's that level of athlete, right? Like, Goddard's so good after the catch. He's a dynamic tackle breaker, but Muth's got that to him where when he blocks, you're like, oh, like that matters. Like, that was an impactful play that he had right there. Muth's one I think who deserves a wave.
I want to own him or manage him in fantasy this year.
Okay.
So I've been talking about the Steelers a lot, so I won't get in too much, but I think he will be the beneficiary of two things. One, I think defenses, as they respect the Steelers' passing attack more this season and play more shell coverage to account for the fact that they have an incredible 1-2 punch at wide receiver. I think he will benefit from that in the middle of the field. And I also think Kenny Pickett's willingness to throw there is also going to help, which is something we saw during the preseason. Again, I've been talking about the Steelers a lot. I don't want to get into it too much, but I could not agree more. Like him a lot as a player. I feel like his underratedness will be short-lived, however, because very high-profile team. His name's fun to say, Okay, running backs. I'm going to start with a guy that I think is on both of our lists, and a guy that I absolutely loved watching, and whose my estimation of him and what he can do is not changed by the fact that his team drafted a running back at 8th overall. And that's Tyler Algier, man. He's so good. Okay. Left him in college too. Whenever I was watching BYU in 2021, right?
Anyways, you and I chatted about Algier at BYU. We were talking Zach Wilson for something, and then all of a sudden we were like, yo, if you watch this 25, like, yo, this 25 is kind of good.
So amazing season last year, second amongst rookies behind Kenneth Walker in total yards. But when you drill down into the advanced stats, the Falcons faced a ton of 8-man boxes. 40% of the time, Tyler Algier was running into them. And he averaged over 5 yards a carry running into 8-man boxes. He was first in yards after contact per carry coming out of them. Finished top 10 in first down rate, third down rate. The dude was a bulldozer last year. Now, the Falcons' offensive line is very, very good at run blocking, and I think that obviously factors into it as well. But like, I feel like he's almost a little bit of a throwback in some ways, because he is like just so strong, keeps his legs churning. He's more explosive than he's given credit for. And I really think that he is going to continue to be productive this year when defenses try to cheat to play the pass in any way.
Yeah, no, so the 8-man box thing is a important point, because like the Falcons faced a ton of 8-man boxes. They also invited a ton of 8-man boxes because they just put tight ends and fullbacks on the field, and they're like, this is no secret how we're playing football. And Algier, when you introduce more bodies into the box, seams become tighter and shorter lived. Like, you just have to be really smart and really decisive. One of the things that you see happen when backs come from college to the NFL is they're used to these like spread offenses, these 6-man boxes, and they're just too patient. Like, they're not on their timing because they're just used to having more space, more room. They can read one guy and kind of rhythm it out, and there's just a lot more freedom to it. Algier is no nonsense, right? You want to be a good underrated back who hangs around in the league for a long time. Be a big, large man who does not hesitate, right? But put your head down, put your shoulder pads down, and go. I definitely think that's going to benefit Algier in this season with Bijan, because like Bijan's electric, Bijan's great, but he'll probably still make rookie mistakes behind the line of scrimmage. Like, it's a dramatically different run scheme than what he enjoyed at Texas. And Algier is something you could set your watch to a little bit more. The other thing is that Algier's a really nice closer, isn't he? Right? Fourth quarter, up by 10. We just want to, up by 6. We just want to eat the clock here. 4-minute drive. 225 pounds of no nonsense. I follow my blockers, can get the job done for Arthur Smith. So I agree. I think he's absolutely going to have a role.
Which backs did you put on your list?
I think Ramondre Stevenson's really, really good. It's been a little bit tricky to find that because of the timeshare with Damian Harris and kind of having to earn that job over him. Obviously, he is in the pole position, right? He's going to have the lion's share of the carries this year, and then they sign Ezekiel Elliott, and there's this moment, this kind of fear, this worry of like, oh, it's going to go back to being a timeshare. I really don't think it's going to be. I think it's going to be a very clear running back 1, running back 2. I think that, Zeke's probably going to eat into the touchdowns a little bit if you're thinking about things from a fantasy perspective, but Ramondre is still the far more dynamic player in all aspects of the game, save for pass protection, and then maybe 3rd and goal from the 1. For context, last season, Harris had only 7 starts, by the way, because splitting time with Harris. Stevenson only had 7 starts last year, splitting time with Harris. He had 1,040 yards and 69 catches, right? All this on 200 carries. If you go since 2000, there are only 13 backs who have had 200 carries, 60 receptions, and then still averaged 5 yards a carry, right? So we're averaging 5 yards a tote on over 200 carries and impacting the receiving game at a high volume. Like, and the names are like McCaffrey and Westbrook and Falk and Jamal Charles, like Frank Gore. It's a good list to be on. If he gets like legitimate actual running back 1 volume, sky's the limit. He's a 1,500 all-purpose yards player and a hugely impactful player to this offense, right? Saved Mac Jones last year with his receiving ability. I think Ramondre is a top 10 back.
That's a category of back where like the teams were insistent on splitting carries, and then whenever that back got a chance, you saw it didn't. This is like the honorary Tony Pollard category, but Tony Pollard's no longer in the category.
If we did this pod last year within 60 seconds, Tony Pollard, baby, but not this year.
A guy who I would throw into that, although I have some question marks, is Khalil Herbert in Chicago. Another guy where people are like, is he really an every down back? And then whenever he was given the opportunity to get high volume, he was able to sustain not just the big play ability, which is his calling card, but the down-to-down efficiency. I understand with him, there's questions about pass protection, and I think I'm very curious to see how that running back room shakes out, because they have like a lot of talent there. I really like Roschon Johnson. I think Deontay Foreman's very capable as well. But I want to see how he does as running back 1 over the course of the season, because he is a guy who like advanced metrics really love, not just the explosive stuff, but the yards over expectation have always really have favored him. You know, he ranks near the top or at the top. I think he's first in rushing yards over expectation carry. But again, some of that is like he had so many explosive runs. I think that skews it a little bit. But the Bears' offensive line is going to be better. He runs next to one of the most dynamic running threats at quarterback in football, which makes a big difference. So he's a guy where I'm like, okay, this could be, you and I were talking about like someone you want to plant your flag in. Yeah. This could be a year where he like breaks out and produces in a really big way. Yeah.
I've been a big Khalil Herbert guy for a while, not least because last year the Bears would run David Montgomery for the first 2 drives of every game, and then the 3rd drive of the game would be Khalil Herbert's. So you just have to wait and then bet the over on Khalil Herbert's rushing prop after the 2nd drive when it went down, just automatically. Loved Khalil Herbert. Made a lot of money on Khalil Herbert last year. Something that, so we're talking about Ramondre, we're talking about Khalil Herbert, and we're talking about Tyler Algier. All these dudes are bowling balls, right? I mean, Khalil Herbert's like 5'9", 210. Ramondre's 6 foot 230. Tyler Gio's what, like 5'10", 225? Like these are all shorter, squattier, thicker dudes. I got one more for you, and that's Jaylen Warren for
He's
for
on my
the
list
Steelers,
too.
right? And
He's
Warren,
on, I
right?
love him.
Warren right
so
now
good.
is just like this is your it's your king of like running back replacement value thing, right? Where it's Najee Harris, early drafted player. Everybody's mad at the Steelers for drafting running back in the first round. He's not that efficient on a per snap basis. Negative EPA per attempt. He's got a success rate under 40% 40% on the season last year. And then here's this undrafted free agent behind him, Jaylen Warren, who's just can scoot, can break a tackle, nice contact balance, low to the ground. He averages. He had a 10+ yard run rate, double that of what Najee Harris had last year, 14% relative to 7%. He had a 46% success rate as a runner. Najee Harris had 36%. So everybody, all the numbers bros, all the data geeks are like Jaylen Warren's the best back in the Steelers backfield. I think there's a lot of like defenses adjusting how they play when 22's back there versus when Jaylen Warren's back there. But in general, Warren can play. Warren can absolutely hang, and he's a strong hipster society, card carrying member right now.
That really is the trend with a lot of these guys. It's like, okay, am I properly taking into the context of how defenses are playing him? Sample sizes are different, but yeah, he's there 100%. I think Kenneth Gainwell is like a really good example of that too. That was a guy I was like kind of tossing around in my mind a little bit. One more back, I just want to give an honorary shout out to Samaje Perine. I just like really love Samaje Perine.
The king, the original bowling ball back, the original, just as tall as I am, wide back. I love him.
Bro, don't be surprised if in this Denver offense he produces at a very high level.
5'11", 236 is the listing for Samaje Perine. It's a healthy young man, baby.
Okay. I think Tyler Algier is the king in our clubhouse, though. So he's first team, all underrated on our guys. For offensive line, I'm not going to lie. I just texted Mike Golick Jr. and asked him for a bunch of names, as I am wont to do.
Who does Mike like?
Okay, so I'm going to read some of these names to you, and you can tell me if they were on your list. Not Christian Darrisaw, too well-known. Brian O'Neill, a right tackle.
First name on my list. Me and Mike are like this, baby.
Corey Linsley, who I was like, I don't know. He's pretty, everyone knows he's pretty good, but, the center with the Chargers, of course. He mentioned both the two Lions, Frank Ragnow's center, Jonah Jackson at left guard, Wyatt Teller, which is a real hipster pick for that Cleveland offensive line.
Wyatt Teller was like an all-pro 2 years ago.
I don't know. In Green Bay, we talked about these guys last week, Elton Jenkins and Zach Tom. I mean, you could really Green Bay is funny because everybody does everything and they're all really good at it. And then this was actually, I volunteered this one, but Abe Lucas, who's Seattle's right tackle, I think
played well.
Is a real candidate for this list. So
I thought about Dame.
Thank you to Michael Jr. for most of those names.
I thought about Damian Lewis for the Seahawks as well a little bit. Damian Lewis built like a fire hydrant.
He was good last year.
Yeah, we're really doing a short and thick guy thing here. But he's an ascending player. I think that he's rounding out well. I had Brian O'Neill right away. I think like one of the best compliments you can get as an offensive lineman is that nobody knows you and nobody talks about you, because it just means you're doing your job and not causing problems. Brian O'Neill's just had over 1,000 snaps for 4 straight seasons as a starting right tackle whose impact, it's like above average impact in run blocking and pass blocking, and nobody talks about him. Just chopping away, just doing his job. I love Brian O'Neill. Deion Dawkins was the other guy I had at offensive tackle.
Yeah.
I think that Bills offensive line has had a ton of transitions and changes and underperformance from draft picks and free agents, and Deion Dawkins has been holding it down as best he can at left tackle, does a good job there. I do have a recent Bills acquisition as well in David Edwards, who was a guard long time for the Rams and now has moved to Buffalo. He was not good when they made him play tackle. When he got to guard, it took him a little bit to settle in. He now feels like he's had a home. I was watching, trying to get a perspective on the Bills offensive line this summer, and I was like, David Edwards. I didn't really watch that Rams offense too much last season, if we're being honest. David Edwards had his moments.
I'm a little skeptical of this one.
David Edwards, he's my deep cut. He's my year away from being a year away. Watch out for David Edwards.
I watched some of him in the Rams preseason and playing guard. I don't know. We'll see. Okay, let's flip it to the other side of the ball and talk about the defensive line. Talk about, you and I were talking about how defensive tackle is... There's a lot of candidates for this. You go first. Give me some of your names.
How many you want?
Anyone you're particularly passionate about. Okay,
right.
give me a few of them and then land on the one that you're maybe the most passionate about.
Yeah, so there's I think the greatest hits. There's so many defensive tackles who are really, really good run stoppers who also provide impact as pass rushers. Tear Tart,
Mm.
Philly boy, Tennessee Titans is the classic. Tart's just a dominant physical force, just eats up space, collapses the pocket, a ton of fun to watch. Grover Stewart,
Yeah.
who's with the Colts, plays a similar role and does it extremely well.
Classic.
DJ Jones and DJ Reader of the Broncos and the Bengals, respectively, are DJs.
Yeah.
They both moved in free agency at the same time 2 off seasons ago, and I have spent years trying to figure out which one is where and where they came from. Just 2 DJs at the same position, moving teams. It threw me off. But the actual 2 names I want to hang my hat on here will be Osa Odighizuwa with the Cowboys. Osa is a 285-pound defensive tackle, which is not typically how you do it. And the Cowboys have had interior run defending problems for most of Osa's time as a permanent starter. And the fact that he's a little bit light has something to do with that. However, the Cowboys had a 45% pressure rate as a team last year on opposing dropbacks. And a big part of the reason is because they've got a Michael Bennett-esque iteration player playing over the 3-tech, where this guy's just so good at getting skinny, so good at winning with his hands right away, and so freaking quick off the ball that he's able to disrupt and get upfield. He's such a I create issues that other people clean up player, right? When it comes to pass rush, just get there, compromise the integrity of the pocket, make stunts easier, twists easier, games easier. Quarterback has to move, and now Michael Parsons' job just got easier. DeMarcus Lawrence's job got a lot easier. Love Osa Odighizuwa. And then the last one, the deep cut. Nathan Shepard for the Saints comes from the Jets, right? This Jets defensive line factory. Nathan Shepard is very well built, great hands, good penetration player who just did not have to play for the Jets, just did not have to take a substantial number of snaps for them. They just had such a deep rotation. He's one that the Saints are really betting on emerging. He's a starter for them at this point, next to Kalen Saunders, with all the defensive line departures that they've had. And Shepard's a player who's been highly effective in his limited reps. I think more reps, he should still be able to keep a relatively high floor, like Nathan Shepard a lot.
I was looking at the Saints defensive line because defensive tackle is really the biggest question. I mean, the defensive line generally is the big question with some of the departures they had. But I was like, Nathan Sanders and Kalen Saunders. Sorry, Nathan Shepard and Kalen Saunders.
It's tough.
That's pretty good. That's pretty good. That's pretty good. I think Saunders is decent as well. That's a real deep cut. But I like all the names that you mentioned. I wanted to give Victoria mentioned this, I think, in our Victoria's a friend of ours on Twitter, mentioned Daquan Jones, who I thought was because I think that's a really astute one because no one talks about him, but people forgot that the Bills' run defense was just absolute trash, and he really shored up that problem for them. They were quietly so much more physical last year and better in short yardage. Right. And power situations, and I think he was a huge reason why. So I think that's a good one.
And he's a Tennessee cast-off, isn't he? I'm not making that up, right? He came from Tennessee?
Jones? God, what was his last team before?
Yeah, it was the Titans, of course.
Now the Titans have Arden Key, who's also, by the way, let's just say they have Autry and Key, who are just all underrated, all pros.
Yeah, first team all pro, underrated team, last 5 years in a row. Yeah, I mean Autry's on my list for edges, but at one time, the Titans had Jeffrey Simmons, and then next to him, right, it was Tear Tart and Danico Autry. It was Daquan Jones. They have Arden Key now. They had Harold Landry, who when Landry was healthy, I would have argued him a spot on this team. It was just. Yeah. It was just some dudes, capital S, capital D, and then Jim Schwartz was coaching the defensive line. It was the ideal. It was the ideal unit.
There's still, with Autry and Key, there's still, I think, and then Landry coming back from injury, really good. So moving to sort of ends, since we're on those guys, I was gonna say Zach Sealer, but he just got a big contract in Miami. But it wasn't crazy big. I think it was small enough to where he still qualifies for this list. Wilkins is a superstar in my estimation and gets most of the shine, but It's really hard not to. Jack Sealer, not only is he extremely stout in run defense, he really gives you pass rush upside that I think sometimes gets under recognized.
Sealer and Autry, are both two really good examples of just knowing exactly where your bread's buttered. Like, you don't need to have 19 pass rush moves, right? We don't need to have like clips of you working your hands 12 different ways in the offseason. Like with Danico Autry, it's the stutter, and with Zach Sealer, it's the swim. And it's just, listen, we hit this really well. And we hit it over and over and over again. And it allows it to produce consistently. Sealer's also weird because he's 6'6", 300. Like he takes a legitimate amount of, like, he's technically like a defensive tackle for them. And then he plays like I would say 30-40% of his snaps on the outside. And so he's got that same thing Autry does in terms of positional versatility. That's really, really handy to have when you're trying to game your front a little bit. I'm very hesitant to talk about Zach Sealer though, because at one time I described Zach Sealer as solid, and Miami Dolphins fans yelled at me for like 24 hours. And I just he's underrated. He's a good player. We got to maybe chill out a little bit. He's making Devon Hamilton money.
Okay, edge, since we're kind of here. Okay, so gosh, there's so many ways we can go in this. I feel like all-time, a guy who I would put in the Luvu long NFL podcasters talk about him too much, Ogbo Okoronkwo.
Yeah.
Former Ram in Cleveland. I don't know. I feel like I've talked about him a lot. So, but someone who, again, sort of similar to, I forgot who I was saying this. Oh, maybe it was Algier at top. Who was I talking about? Oh, no, I was talking about Bourne. You watch him, you see it, the advanced metrics reflect it.
Yeah. Small
sample size guy. But I think what just stands out to me watching him, Ben, is just the bend, the speed when he turns the court. Like I think it's interesting that it's kind of like he's flown under the radar because he really pops on screen. And obviously now he'll have a lot of opportunities opposite Myles Garrett in Cleveland. So,
yeah. He's one of those guys where you go back and you read the pre-draft eval, and it's like, man, quick as a wink, knows how to use his hands, understands how to finish at the quarterback, got natural physical gifts, bend, explosive, good eyes, recognition. What if he's too small to play in the NFL? And then you watch him and you're like, nope, he made it. We're good. It was Brian Burns, right? The same thing when Burns was on this list. He's now ascended beyond this list, but it was, what if he's too light? And it's like, I don't know. He's got everything else. So long as he like learns how to survive a little bit playing in the 240s, Frankie Luvu, when he's on the edge, he kind of, moonlights as an edge rusher. He's more of an off-ball guy now. But it's just, can you survive at your lighter weight? And if you can, you have everything else, right? And you're also able to out-sprint some of these big offensive tackles to the point of attack, which is huge. So Obo's a very good example of like how a guy gets on this list, which is do something really, really, really well. Maybe have a fact of your game that's supposed to be limiting, but so long as you have the technique and the intelligence to get over that, all of a sudden you're like a really, really good role player. Like you have a very clear job that you feel better than a lot of people.
Houston's kind of been like the all underrated defensive line now for a little bit, and they've been pumping out guys. And then I think now that you throw Will Anderson, who's very good and is going to get a lot of attention, into the mix, suddenly we're going to watch them. You're going to be like, yo, Grenard. Jerry Hughes still doing it.
I should have Grenard on my list. I love Grenard. That's a name right there.
He's in one where I've been watching a lot of Texans preseason football because I wanted to watch CJ Stroud, and I was like, oh, damn, that guy's back. He's really good. And Jerry Hughes is still good. Jerry Hughes is still good. I know we talk about him like it's like, oh my God, how is he still walking? Oh my, he's 35. Yeah. But when you watch him, he's still like, they just line him up at the 7 tech. He's still decent in run defense. Still gets to the quarterback. Still a good football player.
Who could really use a player like Jerry Hughes right now? The Buffalo Bills. Tough.
Dude.
Tough. Or
the Ravens, by the way.
Ravens could use a player like Justin Houston. And apparently this year was the year that was done.
Also still good.
Yeah. My favorite John Grenard fun fact, measurables at the combine, 6'3", 40th percentile for edge rushers. 263 pounds, 20th percentile for edge rushers, 34 and 7/8 inch arms, 92nd percentile for NFL rushers. Man just got vines. Guy can touch his kneecaps without bending over. Love it.
I want to talk about Montez Sweat here.
Yes. Talk about vines.
Yeah, we both love him. Let's plant our flag. Montez Sweat. And I think he absolutely qualifies. He'd never been a Pro Bowler. But I was talking to feel about this. What Washington did, the amount of draft capital they spent on their defensive line is, I think, like kind of quietly slept on when we talk about like it's not a thing where we I don't think we talk enough about the roster construction and how historically unusual it is, and the fact that they appeared to have hit on all of them. And it's just very fascinating. Right. Now they have an interesting decision to make because of it. However, picked up his option, did not pick up Chase Young's option. They're essentially in competition this year for a long-term contract on Washington. I think Montez Sweat has established himself as the dude there. He is a guy, I think the reason he's on this list is the sacks haven't been there, but the pressures and the hits are there. And Bill Barnwell has this great metric, I guess you would call it, where I think the way he does it is whatever your quarterback hits or knockdowns are, you should have a 45% sack rate. Judging by that, Sweat had 28 hits last year, which amounts to nearly 13 sacks, but he only had 8.
Yeah.
So there's a suggestion that, okay, he should be getting more sacks. And then when you turn on the tape and you watch him, he should be getting more sacks. The dude is so strong. I think that's the thing that just leaps off of the tape is the power that he plays with. And I think he has one of the best long arms in football. Him and Gary, I think, who's actually a pretty similar player in some respects. But I think you've seen him over the course of his career in Washington slowly add to his pass rush plan. To me, this feels like a guy who's like right on the edge of putting it all together, and I feel like this could be his year.
Yeah. So the thing with Sweat and the sack numbers is that Sweat's such a useful player to have because he's so good at compromising pocket integrity, right? Sweat, like you said, that long arm, that power. Sweat will take your left tackle and put him in the quarterback's lap, right? Now your quarterback can't escape off the left side. He has to move to his right. You can loop to that side. You can game to that side. He's such a useful crasher. He's such a useful disruptor. And you don't get the sack numbers out of that. You do get 11th in the league last year in pressure rate, which is what he was, right, among defensive linemen. He was 14th. My guy coming up is 11th. I apologize. He was 14th. But so you get that ability to maximize the other guys. John Allen has an easier time getting sacks. Chase Young, Daron Payne, whoever, Efe Adoba, whoever, I can't remember his last name. Abada. These guys have an easier time getting sacks because of Montez Sweat, who also could be on the list. So if you want to transition Sweat to being a high sack guy, he does have to change the paradigm with which he operates a little bit and say, like, all right, you're no longer rushing to contain the quarterback, rushing to relocate the quarterback. You have to actually finish these reps. But he's a useful player no matter what, because you don't have guys who have this physical toolkit who can be as disruptive as he is.
This is why he's like a more useful player than Chase Young, or the Chase Young we saw before he got hurt, because Chase sometimes was pass rushing with the intent to get sacks. Montez Sweat was rushing the quarterback with the intention to collapse the pocket and make life easier for everyone else on the defensive line. When he was on the field last year, you saw such a more disciplined pass rush plan. They rushed as a unit. That's why they were so good. I think he's a really, really good player. Is 11th Jalen Phillips in pressure rate? Who's 11th in pressure rate?
No, I thought about Jalen Phillips. I don't think
he's underrated enough.
Yeah, I'm a proud owner of a Jalen Phillips Defensive Player of the Year ticket that we're holding on to. I'm excited about that. No, this is honestly one of the first names I wrote down, and that's John Franklin Myers, the pass rusher for the New York Jets. Right. Franklin Myers was a guy who was on the Rams, had like some preseason moments, got cut. The Jets picked him up. Robert Saleh in the building, and they whatever they got DNA wise, that San Francisco defensive staff of the last few years, they can develop defensive linemen. Franklin Myers is a little bit of a tweener build. He's got great length to him, and they said, all right, this cat can defend the run for us. He can compromise the pocket a little bit, Montez Sweat style. But obviously, we're going to need to, improve upon this, whatever. So let's go. We're going to get Carl Lawson in free agency, and we're going to draft Jermaine Johnson. We're going to draft Will McDonald. We're going to do all this. Bryce Huff's developing. Like we're going to fill out the roster. And all of a sudden, every single year, you know who the best pass rusher off the edge is for the Jets? It's John Franklin Myers, who's just tough as nails, hands like cinder blocks. Holy smokes, can he beat you at the line of scrimmage? So he can control you, right? He can win against the run. He can win on play action. Then he can knife, right? He's a 274, 275-pound guy. So you can, all right, 3rd and 7, stand him up in the B gap. Let's cause some problems. Like he is such a useful player. He's very similar to the mold of Montez Sweat. A little bit not as good of an athlete, not as good of an outside rusher, but still just so handy to have around. Maximizes your other guys. I feel like the Jets defensive line is known as like Quinn and Williams, and then like this rotation of big name edge rushers that they've got in the building. And the guy who just starts on 1st and 10, takes the lion's share of the snaps, and is helpful in all 3 downs is always John Franklin Myers.
Pick a Jet, right?
Yeah. Bryce Huff.
I mean, Bryce Huff, yeah. We mentioned our friend Nate Tice, who unfortunately invoked the ire of Jets fans, and I think Bryce Huff himself by saying Bryce Huff was crushing backups.
That's how the Jets fans found. Yeah, that's how the Jets fans found it. Bryce Huff quote tweeted it because Nate was like, like Bryce Huff is a backup offensive tackle's nightmare, and Bryce Huff was like, you haven't been watching the film, which is a great thing to say to Nate, because all Nate wants to do is watch the film.
I'll say it was like all 22 of the preseason. It's like, well, you're playing. I don't know why you're playing. You're too good to be playing. Bryce Huff's really good.
That's a good point.
Okay. Yeah. Edgewise also, I thought of it's funny. Like I thought a guy, Jalen Phillips and Matt Judon were my guys who are too successful, but I think don't get enough credit.
Yeah.
A guy who I think is like perpetually underrated and I can't believe he's on the Steelers is Marcus Golden, but that's too
Yeah,
Lester.
Golden's a classic one, yeah.
This feels like a good place because to land, we pick it up a little bit. Linebacker / edge, we can now officially talk about Frankie Louvu. I think why is Frankie Louvu the object of adoration of the NFL nerd community? How should I count the way? First, I think it's worth acknowledging why he is the poster child for this list. We're talking about a player who was not only undrafted, but the Panthers signed basically on a flyer. It was a 1-year, like $1 million deal as recently as 2021. Comes in, balls out. They sign him to a 2-year extension. Balls out again. I think there's so many things I love about his game, both as an off-the-ball linebacker and as a pass rusher. So I guess his versatility is the number one thing. When he is on the field, you just absolutely have no idea what he's going to do. But like, to me, Ben, I think the thing that I want to highlight is the physicality with which he plays with, and maybe this is why I love watching him so much. He flies around the field like a banshee and then tackles. Yeah. And then tackles like he's 50 pounds bigger than he is. What is not to love about a player? I mean, he will blow up screens and send them into the never world. Like he's just, and this is not even when he's lined up as a pass rusher, which is where you get, a lot of the sacks and the unpredictability. He is just such a good football player. He is and he's there's really, I think, a dearth of linebackers in the league who can do that right now, who can do all the things that I described at such a high level, and he can cover too. So there's just so much to love.
You brought up his background, right? Like, the undrafted free agent signing on the minimum deal. He plays like it, right? Like that's the thing about Frankie is he plays like his hair's on fire. He plays like it's meat on the table, right? It's last meal, you got to go. The physicality, the instincts, right? Like he'll have those reps where like he's blitzing and he'll time it right on the snap where he knows the count, right? And he's able to get that head of steam. Nose for the ball, right? I mean, he creates turnovers too. Like this is a guy who's got the playmaker ability to him, right? Where you just trust him to get you out of a bad spot defensively because he's going to be able to read something or intuit something or find the football and generate a turnover. Like the instincts are the players with instincts are so fun to watch, and Frankie, it just drips off of Lulu's film, right? Especially when you watch a player like he's next to Shaq Thompson, and at times Shaq is a very good athlete, is not as fast to choose and Frankie, and then Jeremy Chin, who I thought about Jeremy Chin, their safety for this list as well. Those cats are just flying. They're moving at light speed. They're really fun to watch.
He's like I like to call them teleporters, where a
Right.
guy who gets, he had 19 TFLs last year, which is bonkers, by the way. I think it might have been a franchise record. I'm not sure, but which is incredible, by the way, if you're in a franchise that employed Luke Kuechly at one point. But
Yeah.
the point is, he's a teleporter because you watch him, and then he's in the backfield, or he's got, he's pulling down the running back, and you don't understand how it happened. You have to slow it down and watch it almost like frame by frame to see how he navigates his way through traffic, because it does not make sense in real time. It certainly doesn't. You're like, oh my god, how did he get from there to there? Yeah, he rules. Okay, other guys, David Long, we talk about enough. Juwan Bentley is another guy who's like a little.
These are my three names that I have at linebacker. Are those three right there? Easy.
And then I wanted to include Dre Greenlaw, but I'm like, you get to play next to Fred Warner.
Mina, there's a blank name on my list. Like, I have it in Google Sheets. There's a blank cell because it's Dre Greenlaw, and I deleted him because I was like, nah, Dre's known at this point. Yeah.
Am I punishing him for playing next to Fred Warner?
A lot of what you say about Frankie, you say about Dre. He's extremely instinctive. He plays like a bat. Like, he's so fast, right? He plays aggressively. You just know the formula there in San Francisco a little bit better than you do in Carolina, so it's easier to dole out credit elsewhere. The one name that I was bouncing this list off people, and good buddy Seth Galino, PFF, who's a noted Saints fan, was upset that I didn't have Pete Werner on it. And I was like, you know what, that's actually right. Like, Pete Werner, it plays pretty well next to Demario Davis.
Yeah.
They've been trying to find, I think, a really consistent running mate for Davis. Like, there was that moment where it looked like it was going to be Quan Alexander, and then it wasn't. Werner actually, like, legit cover ability to him, and then he can stick a guy. Like, for a lighter linebacker, he can play among the trees and survive. So I do like a Pete Werner for that reason.
It's a good one. Caden Ellis, who was with the Saints last year, now with your boy, Atlanta. He's a little bit more one-dimensional, though, so I was kind of like, I actually think the Denver linebackers are kind of underrated, but I didn't think they were good enough to make this list. But they're unwilling
to engage in Alex Singleton discourse for the sake of my own mental health.
He's pretty good, though. Okay, let's do this. Let's wrap it up with the secondary. Let's do corner, and let's start by talking about a guy that I think we might disagree on, because you didn't have DJ Reed on your list. Yeah. You have some quibbles with DJ Reed. So I admit to a little bit of bias, because DJ kind of, he was from San Francisco, and then in Seattle was where he kind of broke out, got a decent contract in New York. I think why I feel like he deserves his place on this list, Ben, is one, the dude's 5'9", and
we love
and is like plays a lot bigger than his size, and I think compensates for his size with his intelligence, especially as his own corner. You really saw that in Seattle. But the other thing is, like, he plays opposite Sauce Gardner, so he gets targeted, decent. Well, people generally don't throw the outside versus New York, but you'd think a 5'9" guy playing opposite Sauce Gardner would be such an obvious mark for offenses to attack, and still held his friggin' own last year. So I feel like, just what he's overcome, and then his situation, the fact that he still is very good, to me is really impressive.
So here's why, like, we talked about DJ beforehand.
Chance.
DJ's good. He's a good player. Good corner. Jets fans, I talked about John Franklin Myers. I had Michael Clemens on my list. I don't want to hear it. Here's why I struggle to put Reed on this list. Because Sauce Gardner, good on him, by the way, good on the rookie, has done such a good propaganda campaign for DJ Reed, right? They asked Sauce, who's your favorite corner in the league, and he said DJ Reed, which is, that's just good work. That's good business. No, like, they had such a huge improvement in coverage, and Sauce was a massive part of that, but the signing of DJ Reed was the other half of it. And they did a really good job, I think the Jets did, in highlighting that. Like, Reed's a good player who's playing well for them. I don't think he's underrated. I think he gets a lot. I think he gets a ton of credit, and
so
rightfully deserved credit
perception
relative to, like, yeah, exactly. Well, like, I've got, like, like Cam Sutton on my list. Love Cam Sutton.
Cam Sutton is also on my list.
Yeah.
Let's talk about Cam Sutton.
Yeah.
He's he to me is the the Luvu of corners right now. Yeah, I mean, well, I would actually say he's more like the David Long, because when the Lions signed him, all of NFL nerddom
Yeah.
is like slow clap Detroit.
Yeah.
We
Every
what do you like about
single
him?
person, just a quick. In week 6 when we're wondering why the Lions defense improved, it's gonna be Cam Sutton. Yeah, Cam's tough as nails.
What do you like
right?
about him? Talk about it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I remember when Cam, when the Steelers let go of Mike Hilton, who I have Mike Hilton in my like nickel category. Hilton's like an honorable emeritus position on this list. When the Steelers let Hilton walk, it was in part because they're going to play Sutton in the nickel. And you're asking yourself, okay, like Hilton's just known for this toughness that he's willing to tackle. He sticks his nose in the fan. Sutton going to bring this, and then you watch Sutton play, and you're like, yep, Steelers know what they're doing, right? He is a aggressive and physical player who then would get challenged to play on the outside because of injury, because of changing personnel, and survived out there as well. So now you have the versatility to play inside and out. He can comfortably play in man coverage up at the line of scrimmage from both alignments, which is really, really, really hard to do. And then he can also play in zone.
Really important in the Detroit defense, by the way.
And then he's got really, really good zone eyes. It's like what he was more known for, like initially before his NFL career kind of blossomed. Sutton is just like he's not rock steady. Like he'll grab, he'll give up stuff, he'll jump, he'll take some risks, but they're generally calculated, and he'll pay you off with playmaking, with forced fumbles, and with tackling. Extremely likable corner.
So I'm always a little bit hesitant to use stats when talking about cornerback play for all the obvious reasons. It's very hard. The NGS does their best to try to isolate the nearest defender, but you don't know. It's hard to account for all the things that happen in terms of coverage. That said, Cam Sutton is a guy who really pops when you start looking at stats. Last year, allowed the third lowest passer rating as the nearest defender, first in catch rate under expectation, fourth in hawk rate, which is basically NGS's way of rewarding guys who make plays on the ball, ninth in success rate. Just super solid no matter how you slice it, coming from a Detroit secondary or a Detroit pass defense that played a lot of different looks. I think is going to be really, really nice for them. I'll just throw out a bunch of names of guys I liked. I have 2 rookies. I think both Deron Bland, who was the Cowboys nickel, who got a lot of snaps last year. Is he a rookie? Or was he just a first-year starter?
He was a rookie. He was a 5th-round pick last year. Yeah, and so it's coming year 2.
And then another one who I really thought was awesome when he played was Trent McDuffie in Kansas City. That's
a good one.
Go Huskies. No, just I like you. His absence was really felt when he got hurt. Super, super sound, great tackler. Not responsible. He's really, really good eyes. I think my questions about him were more athleticism and physical profile, like speed coming out of college. But I think he held up really nicely. I'm going to throw out one that was actually mentioned in, I think, our request for replies, but I think Michael Davis deserves a lot of credit for what he did with the Chargers last year, basically outperforming J.C. Jackson, who was their marquee signing. Big part of the reason why they kind of figured things out in the home stretch last season. Am I missing any other names you want to nod to quickly before we move on to safety?
I love Deron Bland. I have Chido Awuzie down. I have another rookie into year 2 player, Alontae Taylor for the Saints, who just like at some point the Saints have got to not.
Yeah.
At some point they got to stop getting away with this. It's so annoying. So I like that one. The one guy who I really wanted to like shout from the rooftops because he's such a good player, but he's underappreciated because of the ball production is Carlton Davis, who's the corner for the Bucs. Carlton Davis has never made a Pro Bowl. That blew my mind.
I think both him and Dean are really underrated. Yeah. Like when you look at that defense and you're trying to figure out who the hell the Bucs are, you're like, damn, they still have one of the better cornerback duos in the NFL.
Since 2020, the last 3 seasons, Carlton Davis has 41 pass breakups. Okay, that's 6th among all corners. He has 6 interceptions, which is not 6th among all corners. It's way, way, way worse than 6th among all corners. When Carlton Davis came out of Auburn, the book was, if this dude could catch, he'd be the best corner in the draft. 6 years later, if this dude could catch, he'd be the best corner in the league. So the ball skills are the thing that holds Carlton Davis back. But man, when we talk about a corner with legit NFL wide receiver size, with incredible press technique, and then the fluidity to move, right, to actually match these shiftier dudes, Carlton Davis, he's all that in a bag of chips. If we could just get the man on a jugs machine, and we cook him with gas. But that's why he gets underappreciated, right? Only 6 interceptions. He doesn't get the name recognition, but Carlton Davis, lights out player. I love him so much.
It's a good one. Okay, I have 3 safeties.
Can I
So much
guess?
crossover we have.
Yeah, can I guess? Can
Yeah.
I guess that two of them are Kyle Duggar and Cam Curl?
Yeah, and the third is Javon Holland.
Oh, Holland's a good one. Holland is a big, like, I think Holland is very good, and I think a lot of people realize that he's definitely good. But I think after 1 year in a Vic Fangio defense, folks are gonna be like, "Holy smokes, Javon Holland!"
Yeah, he feels a little bit. Yeah. I'll focus. I've talked about Duggar like too much to the point where you might have to take out a restraining order on me. So let me talk about Cam Curl, because Cam Curl's a guy who named his first 3 albums. I remember watching Washington when he was a rookie, and I had no idea who he was. No idea. I don't even know where he went to college. Maybe you could tell me.
Arkansas, Woo Pig, baby.
Had zero opinions on him. Turned on the Washington defense and was like, who the hell is this guy? He's actually really good. And it's funny that I say that, and I bring that up because not only did I think he jump pop to me as a rookie, he has gotten better every year, and I think that's why I want to shout, like, give him, because he was, I was like, yeah, he's back safety, he can tackle, he's good in run defense, but he has improved as a cover safety every year, and I think gives them flexibility on the back end because of his versatility. That was not the case maybe earlier in his career, where you didn't feel as comfortable saying, okay, you can use disguise with him as in split safety looks. Now I think you can. I think he's become a true all around safety, and I think Washington should pay him.
So I extremely agree on Cam Curl, who again has like he has the like the physicality, the instinctiveness, the aggressiveness we talked about with these defenders, and the limiting factor was people thought he wouldn't be fast enough, right? He just wouldn't have the athletic ability, the speed and the explosiveness, and he just made up for that by being really smart and really quick. Like, I had Talanoa Hufanga out of San Francisco on this list, and then I was like, he's probably not like 100% there yet. Like, he was hot and cold last year. Hufanga's the guy's got to learn from Cam Curl's tape in terms of where you take your risks, how you take them, and how you maximize having a profile that maybe doesn't necessarily have the athleticism you'd like. While thinking about Cam Curl, I remembered how much I liked Derek Forrest last year, who's the other safety.
He's a good player too.
On the Commanders. Really, and I was like, I'm gonna preempt Mina, and I'm gonna go for the new hipster Commanders.
That safety. Is out hipstering Cam Curl.
Cam Curl's mainstream now. Oh, you like Cam Curl? I like Cam Curl. Derek Forrest, who if I always say, if you have a safety who's going to have high versatility, who's going to be able to play a lot of different roles for you.
Yeah.
You need to have an equal but opposite force. The other guy also has to be able to do that, right? He has to be able to realistically line up in a bunch of different spots and hang. And that's Derek Forrest. Better on the roof, whereas Cam Curl's better in the box, so they have good synergy there. But Forrest can actually line up and play over tight ends and survive. He's got enough size and length for it. And then he'll be physical. He'll step down against the run. He'll make a tackle. I think that both Curl and Forrest lack what you like in terms of covering slot corners, and then you remember Fuller's on this team, you're like, or covering slot receivers, and then you remember Fuller's on this team, and you're like, oh, right, that's why the Commanders secondary works so well. So there's Derek Forrest. I saw the tape on you. I threw a change up.
I think the Commanders are going to be so good on defense, man. Did you see Emmanuel Forbes blow up that? I think it was a TFL. Mm-hmm. I can't remember which player it was.
Zay Flowers.
Obviously, it was Zay Flowers. Okay. Who's small.
So, yeah. Yes.
But watching that, I was reminded of how much I liked Forbes as a prospect, which is, he just the vision and intelligence with which he plays with when he's off is going to be so important for that defense. And yeah, I'm excited about that. All right.
I also almost had Jamin Davis, their linebacker, because he's growing a little bit. So yeah, the Commanders have got like 5 dudes on defense. He was getting better at the end of last year. He was settling in. It was not good to start. He's getting there. I'm a Jamin Davis believer.
Well, somebody maybe should write all these down, and we can put together a team and see how many of these guys end up being Pro Bowlers. But if you guys feel like we left anyone out, hit me in my mentions, unless it's Aaron Jones. But no, Ben, I feel like you were once on my all underrated team, but now you are too big. You guys can catch Ben on the Ringer NFL show or the Eagles show with Sheil Kapadi. I guess you and Sheil do both the Ringer and the NFL show, and you do an Eagles show together. So you guys are.
Sheil and I are podcasting together 4 times a week this year. So say a prayer to whatever God to Sheil Kapadia. He's going to have a long fall coming to him.
This was super fun. Hope to have you back on during the regular season. Guys, stick around for Seth Walder after the break.
Tickets to the game, merch, meals at iconic restaurants, stays at Caesar's Palace, all this can be yours when you bet with Caesar's Sportsbook. Win or lose, every bet earns reward credits, which you can redeem across the empire. Now, if you haven't started yet, register using code OMAHAFULL, and then place your first bet up to $1,250. If you win, great, keep those winnings. But if you lose, you'll get your stake back as a bonus bet.
Okay, we are back, and as promised, as advertised, I am joined by my friend. He's been on this show before, ESPN's analytics writer. I don't know if you're the only person who has that title. I like how I just said you're ESPN's analytics writer. I don't know, maybe you're the only.
I like that too. Let's stick with that.
Well, you are an analytics writer. You do fantastic work for us covering the NFL. Seth Walder, you guys should follow him on Twitter if you don't already. Are you just Seth Walder? Seth Walder ESPN?
Yep.
Okay, you got your name. That's good. Someone that I talk to a lot and ask a lot of really annoying questions and probably treat a little too much like my own personal Siri when it comes to trying to find stuff on True Media. But I'm excited to have you on right now because I asked you to do something. I did ask you to do something pretty specific that I thought would be kind of fun going into the season as we're nearing week 1, which is sort of something that you do already, which is constantly looking at stats and trying to, or just looking for trends and things that are interesting and things that might have some bearings on the season this year. So I asked you for statistical takeaways from the last season. And then I thought we could use that as a jumping off to talk about whether they'll continue, how they might affect certain teams, and you came up with some really good ones. We're going to go through a few. Are you ready to deliver these?
I am ready. Thank you for the kind intro. I am ready.
Let's take your first one, because your first one is like a really, I think the thing you sent me first is one of the most significant trends in football right now, and really affects, I think, every team in the NFL, but especially when we talk about the good teams, the good offenses, the good defenses. So what is your first finding?
The first thing, I'm really happy you asked me to do this because I think we're in the season and you're feeling things happening, but we're looking at so many different specific things. And then now it's like we've got this big gap away from the year. And it's good to look at the whole league sometimes and just see how things have changed. And so it was the first thing I did was I know we knew that passing efficiency, or we were talking about rushing efficiency, closing the gap on passing efficiency over the course of the year. And it was true to some degree, but I was looking at it in retrospect and what I was honestly shocked about the degree here, which is that early down passing in terms of EPA per dropback was at its lowest level last season since 2006. And that kind of blew my mind. I did not expect to see that number. Did you expect it to be that way, Mina?
No, not that much. So what you are describing is something that you and I have talked about. I think we talked about on this show. We talked about NFL Live last year, which is, it's really, I feel like you have to kind of go back in time. So basically, about 5 to 7 years ago, offense exploded. Passing offense exploded. Teams realized it was advantageous to pass on early downs. And then a couple years ago, defenses sort of fought back. I say a couple years ago, I think that's kind of when it really started, because 2021 was the famous Patrick Mahomes too high conundrum. But you really saw, I think, increasingly, these defenses are basically making a concerted effort to take away the deep ball. That's I think in layman's terms, the simplest way to describe what happened. So, and then last year, you noticed that it just affected the way offenses played. It affected the efficiency of certain offenses. But that's a very dramatic shift. There's saying that, and I think we say that and we're like, but you should still throw the ball, But and you should still throw the ball a lot. But I think that is like defense really fought back is what I guess my first reaction to that. Like, wow, like it's not that the passing evolution is over by any means, or that offenses are going to go back to like ground and pound, old school football, whatever. But the easy pickings, it's kind of like in the stock market, like there was like a boom, and I don't want to say it busted, like it wasn't like a bubble burst, but the dramatic gains, I feel like, really recessed.
Yeah, I feel like there's two. You made this point, but I think we've got to be really clear. That's like there is a difference between saying that the gap between rushing and passing dropped, but still passing on early downs is way more efficient than rushing. That continues to be the case. Like it's EPA per dropback on early downs is plus 0.07. Rushing down early downs, we're talking about design carries, negative 0.02. I'm sure it would be lower if we eliminated quarterback runs. So there's still a big gap between those numbers, just smaller than it's ever been. I think what surprised me is that I always imagined that this would happen over time, that there would be this reduction because it was just too big an edge. It couldn't last forever, but that the reason that would happen is because teams would just start passing more and more and more and more until the efficiency dropped.
Yeah.
And that's not really what happened. Like it is true that teams passed more in early downs relative to like the late 2000s, but over the last 10 years, it's been really kind of flat. And it's what you said, which is defense is changing really over the last 5 years only. Defense is changing the way they do it and the way they defend those early downs. And like the numbers are pretty stark, like what you described. Take away the deep ball. In 2017, too high percentage on early downs, 35% of dropbacks, 35% of the time, 44% last year. So that's a big spike. And in every one of those seasons, yards per attempt against single high coverage on early downs was higher than yards per attempt against too high coverage, which is like what we expect, but I think it's good to see it bear out. Dropbacks against light boxes, if we're just looking at 12, let's look at 12 and 21 personnel. How often do they get light boxes? 2017, 32%, 2022, 43%. So like teams are just more willing to say, hey, okay, yeah, run on us, go for it, give it a shot. And that's what's changed. That to me is really interesting, but I still think teams should be, still crank up it's clearly the team should be cranking up passing more often despite all of this.
I think it like what we're talking about is you're describing a statistical phenomena that's the product of really two things: defensive structure and philosophy, and then I think the kind of players that defenses have, which is defenses have gotten lighter. There's been so much investment in pass defense at the expense of run defense. So, naturally, defenses have gotten better for those two reasons at playing the pass. I think the next question, and the one that you're kind of hinting at, but I think it's a little complicated because, as you said, it is still more efficient to pass on early downs, is like, okay, so what should your offense look like, right? Because we know that these are the broader trends happening with defenses. What's the optimal way to build an offense in 2023? And I think that's a really complicated question because we have seen different types of offenses basically solve what you and I are talking about. First, I'll go back to the Chiefs because I think they are sort of exhibit A for just what is the optimal way to do everything in the NFL. And obviously having Mahomes and Reed changes a lot of that. But, I have to think there were conversations in the building like, hey, defenses are changing. Maybe we can move on from Tyreek Hill. Because of they parted ways with him after that 2022 one too high conundrum. And we want to invest in our interior offensive line. We want to get better at running the ball. It doesn't mean we're going to run the ball on early downs. We're going to have a really, really deadly, efficient, quick passing game. Our quarterback is going to learn how to solve it like a cyborg that he is. But we want to be more multiple. We're going to put multiple tight ends on the field, that kind of thing. So there's that thing, which is like, let's be more multiple. Let's worry a little bit less about We don't have to be as explosive, but we can still be really efficient. And then you have teams like Atlanta that is solving it in kind of a different way, which is totally zigging, where the league is zagging and going like super heavy and investing in their skill players. A team that does run the ball, but runs the ball really well on early downs. And I think I'm kind of rambling, but my point is just there's no right answer, but I think the best offenses are at least recognizing that this is happening and saying, okay, we have to have a lot of solves. The Bengals too, more similar to the Chiefs, but like we have to have a lot of solves for this because again, the easy stuff just isn't there anymore for offenses. And I think that's just the way I would sum all this up.
The other cheat code is not, which is play action, is not working as well as it once did.
Yeah, that is fascinating.
When I said at the beginning, it's like what we expected to be like teams pass more and more and more and more and efficiency would drop, and that didn't really happen. But that did happen with play action, where the team's play action is increase, and its efficiency is dropping. Now, it's still true that like play action dropbacks early downs still more efficient than just non-play action dropbacks. So like it doesn't mean we haven't reached the equilibrium yet, but it's not what it once was in terms of its value, which could have been another like answer to your question, but is like increasingly less of an answer.
And that's where a team like the Niners are another example of a team an offense that solved some of this stuff, because that's a team that used to be wide zone play, early down play action, and they have moved off of that. The run game has evolved. Something we talked about in NFL Live is the way the run game evolved in response to how defenses were playing outside zone runs in particular. But there are other ways that Kyle Shanahan now creates mismatches and optionality underneath. That are just really just a response to how modern defenses are built. I think this is really this is what you just described. When we'll move on to the next thing, really informs to me how all the best offenses are being built right now. And but it's they're all different, so there's not like a one size fits all solution for this. So it's really quite interesting. And I want to say one more thing. It's not like speed still doesn't matter. Speed matters in terms of creating space. You can play all the too high you want. It doesn't, if we saw it with Miami, like it still matters. But it's just not as easy. Okay. What is your number 2 takeaway?
Okay. So we have these new metrics called the receiver tracking metrics we released last year. We break down receivers' abilities to get open, make the catch, generate yak, all relative to expectations about the play, like based on what route they ran, the coverage, crucially, who's playing quarterback, a bunch of factors like that, whether there's play action. And those are all available on 538. You can look at them individually. We do have also a team version of that. It's not available anywhere, but it's what you would imagine, which is just like a weighted average of all the receivers. And I was just looking at the top 10 teams in the RTM's overall score. So that's all 3 categories together. Those were the Seahawks, 49ers, Steelers, Bengals, Vikings, Eagles, Saints, Chargers, Falcons, Browns last year. And those teams had a win percentage of 600. And I just thought, that's kind of interesting for a stat that, on one hand, it's like, okay, teams whose players play well win more games. I get it. But like, on the other hand, it's like that we're doing our best to isolate receiver play from quarterbacks. And I thought, Kansas City, we know that about their passing efficiency, and they are not on that list. And it just made me think about the value of the receiver position, receiver tight end position. I think the league certainly feels that way, though. We're coming off an offseason where receivers didn't get paid as much as at least I thought they were going to get paid. And it just had me wondering about teams with really good receivers who could, maybe elevate their play. And like Pittsburgh is the one that really jumps out to me. Those RTM numbers love Deontay Johnson and love George Pickens for 2 completely different reasons. And I just wonder if that's how that's how the Steelers end up making that leap, and maybe could that explain the Seahawks last year? All
this
of that.
is
Go
just
ahead.
receivers, not receivers and tight ends, right? Or
receivers and tight ends.
Okay,
tight ends.
All right. So
yeah,
I was gonna draw different. Okay. So, would your broader takeaway then be like, as much as we value the position, it's possible that it's still not valued enough?
I think potentially. I guess like to me, receiver is the second most important position in the sport, and I think that the league as a whole seems to view it as one of the most important important
really
non-QB positions.
Yeah,
I don't know. That's how I think. Do you think it's the second most important position?
It's God, I haven't really. I would have said we're kind of both sides of the football. I don't know.
Yeah, both sides of the football. While you're thinking, I'll just say, like, to be, because I think there may not, I don't know what the right answer is. I did the Sloan panel this year, the NFL one, and we talked about positional value. And I said this, and I asked if people, or I ranked all the positions, and I said, like, tell me where I'm wrong, right? We had people in the league, in front offices, and that was where there was pushback. Was receiver at number 2 better than edge, better than tackle? Are you so sure?
I think what's tricky about it, because I think it's kind of like if you were building a hypothetical team and, let's say let's throw money out the window, because I think money is where this complicates, and I'll get to why in a second. And you were like, okay, I get to pick the best of things, and but then I have to prioritize the things. I think that this is a total cop-out answer, but it depends on who your quarterback is. So if I had like a truly elite quarterback, but then it's like, you could just double dip and then have like it's hard with edge. I don't know, because I am tempted to say, get to the quarterback, be the quarterback. That's just kind of how I have always thought about football. I do think I would probably put receiver next. This is the old Sewell Chase meme debate.
Yeah.
But I think it's financially it's all very fraught because of the fact that a lot of teams you mentioned, young receivers are just coming in and they're so awesome. And that is what makes the position unique from, I would argue, almost every other position in the NFL right now. Is the quality of receiver we are getting out of these drafts lately is unbelievable, including, many of the teams you listed there have guys on rookie contracts who came in and were fantastic immediately. But, that I like that probably should affect draft strategy too. Obviously it does. I think even this year, I think the receivers went earlier than people thought they would. There was like a sense like, oh, this is such an amazing tight end class. We might get like a bunch of tight ends taken early, and then the receivers drop. Nope. Receivers there was a run on them. And I think, yeah. Let me ask you this. Do you think that the first thing we talked about and the second thing are in conflict at all?
Ooh. Are they in conflict? Like,
if being explosive, passing downfield isn't the, cheap fix it used to be, does it matter as much
I
have
still
elite wide
think
receivers?
Could see it both ways, because like a quick counter argument would be like, well, if not everybody can do it anymore, then it really pays if you can. And then the other thing I guess I just think about is like, what is the best way to build a winner in the NFL? And that is to have a good passing offense. That has to be true.
Well, I think your first point is kind of what I would say, which is, well, if you don't have the good receivers, then they're not going to play shell coverage against you,
right?
So they're doing this because you have these awesome receivers. So I think it matters because it just has such a dramatic influence on how defenses play you.
I like your rookie argument though.
Yeah.
because that's like what's one of the arguments against the running backs, right? I can always draft a guy who's just as good as you, and it's not this. That's an extreme example of what we're talking about, but like let's just combine them. Like my number 3 thing here was how good the rookie class was last year. You know, they had 4 rookie receivers came in the top 20 of the receiver tracking metrics overall.
Who were they?
So that was Olave, Pickens, Garrett Wilson, and Christian Watson among wide receivers only. If you include tight ends, then Watson gets bumped to 21. But like that's really good, and it sure makes me think about. Well, one, I think we may not like one of the things I love about the receiver tracking metrics is that because they try to be quarterback agnostic, you know, a guy like Chris Olave being 6th in those, I think it's saying like, hey, with better quarterback play, you would be recognizing him as, I don't know, like a CD Lamb level receiver. I mean, and it makes me think about this class, right? And like what it could mean for the Vikings or the Seahawks or the Chargers or the Ravens to add a player like that.
The thing about receivers and you know, I'm sure listeners know all the various reasons why, going back to youth football and 7-on-7 and the rules and all of that. It feels like a trend that's not going anywhere anytime soon. Like there was a moment where it's like, okay, Justin Jefferson, but are we really going to find a Jamar Chase? And it's like every year these dudes just shred. And I mean, just watching even some of the rookies this year, and this isn't even like a quote unquote good receiver class. They're just so good at creating separation and route running, doing all the things that receiver tracking metric tries to capture. I feel like it's not changing anytime soon. It is going to be interesting to see if it hasn't really depressed the receiver market the way, like certainly not anywhere close to like what we see with running backs. And I get why not, but it'll be interesting to see at a certain point. And a large part of the reason why not, by the way, is because you need so many of them, you know?
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
That's where we're saying. I do want to quickly note, by the way, just you explained the metric. I think just it's really, first of all, is it still on 538?
It's currently still on 538.
Maybe by the time this comes out, if it's somewhere different, I'll link to it because it is really useful. And I feel like what is so useful about it is the quarterback aspect, because receiving stats have just historically been so hard to separate from quarterback play. Even some of the next gen stats like catch rate over expectation, that's based on the throw, the difficulty of the throw and the catch, not the accuracy of the quarterback. So, and you can look at separation, but separation is such a contextual stat. Anyways, this stat I feel like does probably the closest I've seen to actually isolating what the receiver is doing, which is what we're always trying to do in this space, or what you're trying to do in this space. You mentioned Watson as a guy, before we move on to the next one, who scores pretty high in all of them, which really checks out with the eye test. Are there any other receivers that when you look at them, or just last year when you looked at them, you thought maybe like this stat or these stats generally are giving them credit, but that they're maybe not getting in the mainstream?
I mean, the number one guy is probably Deontay Johnson, where the model believes that he's excellent at getting open. And we know that one of the sort of subsequent research we've done through this is that your ability to get open, your route running, that is by far the most important attribute. Your ability to make contested catches, that's good. Your ability to generate yak relative expectations, that is good. But openness is the one that both is most stable. So if you're good at getting open one year, you're more likely to be good at getting open the next year. And it also just correlates more with production and also future production. Like I looked at how you do in open score in 1 year, then how you do in terms of receiving yards the next year. Do that with all 3 components. They're all useful, but open score is by far the most useful. And so Deontay Johnson, it scores really highly on him. Him and, I have to got to pump up Tyler Lockett, for like the
Oh.
millionth year in a row. He scored really highly. And that guy, he's probably like the historical poster child for that metric. And Johnson is the more recent one. Like those are the contrarian. I wouldn't say Lockett at this point. He gets his due now, but like Deontay Johnson, no touchdowns last year. Like that's somewhat of a contrarian take. And I think I don't know. I'm a fan of these metrics. I'm a believer in what they show, and it's like a really tricky thing to quantify. All credit to Brian Burke. He's the one who did the work here.
No, I love Johnson. I love the combination of him picking such a disparate skill set. It's like if you combine the two of them, you get like the perfect.
Yes.
But okay. How many more do you got for me?
2.
Okay. Number 4.
Number 4 is not really a trend, but it's just the number that I have been writing, talking, thinking about since last season ended. And that is that the Miami Dolphins, when Tua Tagovailoa was on the field last year, were a more efficient offense than the Bills were when Josh Allen was on the field. And they were a way more efficient offense than the Bengals were with Joe Burrow on the field. And the Burrow thing was not, it's not, if you say Burrow and Jamar Chase, it still holds true too. So this was not just like when Chase missed time. And I just cannot stop thinking about that. I mean, we're talking about a team that potentially they were just operating on this upper elite tier when they had their quarterback and the receivers together, and they weren't thought of as being quite on that tier. And we never know what would have happened, but it sure makes me wonder about what's going to happen in 2023.
It flows well from your second point about the value of receivers, right?
Yes.
Just like what if you built this machine where you have these unbelievable receivers and a average to worse offensive line, and a quarterback who was average to worse last year, but then in this year with these receivers, with this play caller, statistically, as you said, played at an extraordinarily high level. It's an interesting thing to consider in light of the receiver thing, in light of the thing we talked about at first about offenses being less explosive, because this offense kind of defied that in some ways. But I think they were able to defy it because of the complexity of the offense. I didn't mention them as like one of the offenses that like solved, but essentially defenses were afraid to play man coverage versus them for almost the entire year. And the offense that they built with healthy Tua, with the healthy receivers, with the optionality and the motion did solve for the sort of shell coverage that they faced a lot of. By basically, this is a really dumbed down version, but like manipulating space with speed and confusion. So I know I keep like trying to tie all these together, but I really do think it is an interesting response to the first thing, because this is an offense that threw a lot on early downs and was attacking downfield, but it was unique in how they did so. It was very different. I thought Mike McDaniel was extraordinary his first season. I also am not horribly worried about the dip we saw at the end of the season, which I did ask you about, because they did run into a bit of a problem in the final few games. The much discussed Chargers game, who they play in week 1, which is going to be awesome. They played the Niners, who have an elite defense, who I thought did a good job of playing him. They faced defenses who were not as afraid to play press man, take away the middle of the field. I think that they have the pieces to counter that. I think the run game is going to be better this year. I think they're going to figure out how to get the tight ends involved. But it will be interesting, Seth, to see, because I don't know if what we saw those first, before Tua got hurt, before the defenses, all of that, I don't know if we're going to see it at this year, because it is year 2 of playing this very unique and interesting offense. That said, you can't solve speed, so
And like team wise, their defense probably gives them like a little more cushion this year.
Yes.
Like,
yeah, totally.
That's another reason why I'm super high on them, of course, because they have this defense. But I think, well, it makes me, as someone that's like buying in on the Dolphins all the way, it makes me happy that you think you're not that worried about those last 4 games being a sign of what's to come. A little worried. Okay, a little worried. All right.
Worried.
Not panicked.
I just feel like you have a lot of pieces in place. Like you have a really accurate quarterback, you have a lot of speed, you have a really smart play caller, you have good running backs. The offensive line concerns me greatly still. I don't know if you caught. I did the EPA splits with and without Teron Armstead, which were pretty dramatic, but also noisy because they. I don't know if you heard me say this.
Yeah.
They coincided with Tua's absence. So you're like, I don't know what to take for this, and he has not played a full season ever. So we'll see. I view the Dolphins, and I've talked about them a lot this summer, as a team that has like, I wouldn't say the highest variance because I think they have too much talent to have a low floor. The ceiling is absolutely a Super Bowl team for the reasons we're discussing. There's just a few things we're like, oh, let's see how this goes.
I'm with you. I think in some ways it's like, it's so difficult to divide credit between McDaniel, Tua, Waddle, Hill, and maybe Armstead too, right? But like the beauty of it is that I feel like I don't need to solve that problem if all 5 of them are there.
Yeah. No, you have to, because you have to say if Tua is an elite quarterback. No, you're absolutely right. They all work really well together. Yeah. So you heard it here first. Seth Walder said Tua is better than Josh Allen. All right, final
one is I was just thinking about. I talked to the Washington Post about. They did a really good story on the Commanders' offensive line and differing opinions on it, but like everyone agreeing it's going to be not great, and especially the interior. The interior looks very shaky, and it reminded me. I had completely forgot about this. It reminded me about Sam Howell's some of his college numbers. I've been thinking a lot about Justin Fields and his 12.5% sack rate, which is just like truly astronomical. Like we talked about like Russell Wilson having a sack problem. Like this is another category altogether.
It's not great.
And going into the draft last year, I was looking at college quarterbacks and their career sack rates in college. Fields was up there, but 2 guys who were higher than him in college were Malik Willis and Sam Howell. And Willis, had a small sample, but took sacks at a super high rate last year. And man, does that make me worried about Howell, especially if we're saying the interior of that line is going to be a real weakness. Does not seem like a good combination.
So I think we should start with the broader thing about sort of pressure to sack rate and sack rate in general being a quarterback stat, because it's something where I never want it to doom a quarterback because sack rate generally, like, I know I just kind of breezily said it's a quarterback stat. It's not just a quarterback stat. I think that became kind of a talking point amongst nerds because it was so long just viewed as quarterbacks not being responsible for it at all. And, we see when quarterbacks move from team to team and it is something, and Wilson being a good example. John Watson, had a pretty high sack rate, I believe, last year in Cleveland. We'll see if that continues. But it is, for me, alarming. And the converse is if a guy doesn't convert pressures to sacks at a high rate, Trevor Lawrence being notable, Justin Herbert, Anthony Richardson. This was something that a lot of, that was really appealing about him, frankly, going into the draft. That's a bright green flag. So I think when you look at a guy like Sam Howell, who in his final year in North Carolina played behind a horrible offensive line, but has a bit of a play style that was conducive to getting sacked a lot, same way Justin Fields did. It's concerning. It's not. I don't think it's like a total deal breaker necessarily, but when you combine that with, as you said, a dubious offensive line, and I think this is something that really doomed Fields his first 2 years in the NFL. We'll see what happens this year with some improvement up front. That's a pretty toxic combination. And I say that as someone who, there's a lot in Sam Howell's game that I like. I like their receiver group a lot. I don't know how they score in our metrics, but it's the one thing that I agree with you could really derail that offensive this season with Eric Bieniemy, because it's like, oh, you're taking this thing that he's already not great at and you're combining it with what is a weakness on this football team.
That's all well said. Yeah, I think it's like none of this is saying it can't work. It's just it's a bad signal. You can still succeed taking a lot of sacks. It just like completely removes your margin of error from so many other parts of the game. And it is quite, we know it's a majority quarterback stat, but players can improve in that area. It doesn't happen a ton. Like Joe Burrow is a guy who has gone from like, I would say bad to below average at sack improvement. I mean, Jay Cutler, I think, had like an insane improvement. He was like horrendous and then got good at it. But yeah, I mean, like Bieniemy is going from playing with the absolute best at sack avoidance.
Oh, sack avoidance. Mahomes is all. I mean, his sack rate last year was insane. Like,
right.
It's low. Yeah, to be clear.
So yeah. to Howell, where we think it's going to be a problem, and I did look. We do see correlation from college. This is a skill that translates from college to pros. So, like you said, it's a bad combination. It's a concerning sign. It's not doesn't mean the end, but it has to be a concern.
I think what you saw with Wilson and Watson, who are guys who never got better at it, really, is that they were so awesome otherwise during like, Wilson like 2013 through 18 or whatever, that it negated, like you'd still have like a lot of like ugly 3 and outs and first and second and 19s and whatever, but because there was the magic, it didn't matter. And now what you're seeing with him, I've talked about this a lot, is like, okay, what if you kept the bad stuff, but you took away the magic? And we'll see if he can improve upon that this year. But I think that's the thing with sack rate, is like, you got to be really, really good at other stuff to compensate for it, especially if you're playing behind a bad offensive line. I would be, your point about like, the quarterbacks who have improved, that's something I'd like to read more about or look into more, is because I'm always interested in things that quarterbacks can get better at. And I think that's kind of like a fun and interesting thing about the NFL right now, is like we're seeing quarterbacks improve in ways that they did not historically improve because of the nature of NFL offense. And there's just, a couple of recent, obviously high profile examples. And I'd be curious to see, in terms of sack avoidance, how rare it is and what it usually takes for a quarterback to get better at it, because it's so important to me.
Totally agree. Don't know the answer, so I'm curious too.
That's your next assignment, Seth. Thank you so much, as always, for joining. This was great. We'll definitely catch up as the year goes on and see how these things shake out. You guys can follow him at Seth Walder. Check out the receiver score wherever it is.
We are committed to it being somewhere.
I will continue to use it because it is really cool. And thank you so much for joining. This was really fun.
Thanks, Mina.